The rubber boom was part of the history of Bolivia, of Peru, and Colombia, and so on. But then, in the case of Brazil, in the 60s, we had a military coup, and the military government in Brazil had a very strong view of the geopolitical threat of Brazilian sovereignty over the Amazon. And as a result of this, the Brazilian government of the time designed a policy which was based on a slogan: integrar para não entregar. Integrate so as not to hand over the Amazon to foreign interests. And the strategy was largely based on agricultural expansion. The strategy was to build roads, and on the basis of these road construction, stimulate migration of people, mostly from the arid parts of Brazil, the northeast of Brazil, into the Amazon. It's interesting to note that we're the same people who were part of the rubber boom, because the rubber boom in Brazil was powered by labor from the dry parts of Brazil, from Ceará state, which is a very dry state of Brazil. And again, in the 1970s, when the military designed these roads, they also gave a big emphasis on migration of people from that particular region, which had not only the problem of droughts, very severe and very frequent, but also conflicts on land tenure, huge conflicts. So it was a way of solving the land tenure conflicts by sending landless small farmers, small producers into the Amazon. But it was not limited to people from the Northeast. We also had migrants from other parts of Brazil, and especially from the extreme south of Brazil, the Gaúchos, from Rio Grande do Sul, the southernmost state of Brazil, which have a very strong culture and attitudes in terms of expanding and conquering, and the Gauchos are very present still today in the Amazon. It's very easy to find centers of cultura gaúcha, Gaúcho culture in the Brazilian Amazon. Well, this policy of the 1970s was a policy that also had an urban special case, and this special case was Manaus. Manaus is very isolated, so the strategic thinking was to have Manaus develop as a free trade zone. And in the first years, it was just like a duty-free of an airport, selling whiskeys and perfumes and similar goods for people mostly from southern Brazil that would fly to Manaus, spend a couple of days, buy these things, and go back to the other parts of Brazil. And until this was eventually substituted by a new free trade zone, which was based on industries. And today Manaus is the largest city of the Amazon. It's the largest economy of the Amazon. It's responsible for most of the federal taxes collected in the whole Amazon in Brazil. And it's based on an industry of cell phones, motorcycles, and a number of high-tech goods that are produced here. Manaus is the largest manufacturer of motorcycles in all the Americas. It's the only place where brands like Harley-Davidson is produced outside of the US. It's a huge factory of Samsung, which is the largest producer at present here. Just to give you a feel for the brands and the names. So these are all big multinational companies which have used the tax incentives to establish and develop not only an assembly plant, but also a whole set of side factories that supply parts to these goods which are produced in Manaus. And the interesting thing is that the result of this policy was not an intended one, but it ended up being a very significant policy to reduce deforestation in the state of Amazonas, because this policy based in industries of Manaus concentrated all the economic activity and the population in the urban area of Manaus, and thus the interior of the state of Amazonas, here I'm referring to the state of Amazonas, has had very little deforestation. This huge state of Amazonas, which has 1.5 million square kilometers, has 97% forest cover as today, 2016. So it's very significant impact of the Manaus Free Trade Zone, but also it's related to the road network being very limited. The state of Amazonas has very, very few roads, basically the Trans-Amazon Highway and the road that goes to Venezuela, BR-174. Well, I'd like to close this short history of the Amazon, calling your attention to a couple of key concepts. First, that we have basically two types of individuals or social groups in the Amazon. We have the Indians before the Europeans, and then we had the arrival of the Europeans, and mostly in demographic terms through the migrants from the northeast of Brazil in the rubber boom, and then in the latter part of the 20th century, people from all over Brazil, including from the northeast of Brazil, but also from southern parts of Brazil, such as the Gaúchos. And so what we find today is a blend, is a mixture, is a population which is mostly urban. It's very interesting to note that 80% of the Amazon population is urban. And I'll go back to this point later, because this is directly related to some sustainable development goals and directly related to some public policies that have been very inefficient in some areas of the Amazon. But the point being that it is this very heterogeneous biophysical landscape with also a very heterogeneous population, part of that coming from pre-European settlements, which are the Indians, and then followed by these influx from other parts of the country. And thus today it's very hard to speak of a single Amazon, as I was pointed out before, in terms of the scale and the geography of the region.